Pressing your face against another human's face and exchanging 80 million colonies of bacteria is the single most efficient way to catch a respiratory infection, yet your brain treats it like a biological victory. If you really think about it, the act of kissing is a massive evolutionary gamble, an intimate trade of pathogens, saliva, and genetic data that seems, on the surface, like a very good way to end up sick or dead. In a world where survival is usually about keeping a distance from parasites, humans have spent thousands of years doing the exact opposite. We don't just tolerate this proximity, we crave it. We've turned a potential medical disaster into our most celebrated romantic ritual. But as it turns out, your ancestors weren't just being affectionate. They were performing a high-stakes biological interrogation that determined whether their bloodline would continue or disappear forever. Somewhere in the frantic exchange of chemicals and nerve impulses, a secret message is being sent, one that your conscious mind isn't invited to read. Because when you lean in for a kiss, you aren't just looking for love. You are conducting a forensic investigation of your partner's immune system. It's a strange thought to have while you're standing under the mistletoe or sitting on a park bench, but the myth that kissing was invented as an expression of romance is one of the first things we need to dismantle. We often imagine that at some point in the distant past, a particularly poetic group of humans decided that pressing lips together was a beautiful way to show care, but the reality is much more clinical and perhaps a bit more disturbing. If kissing were purely a cultural invention, we would expect to see it everywhere, or perhaps nowhere, but the distribution of this behavior across the globe tells a different story. Anthropologists have found that in some cultures, like the Mihiniku of Brazil, the idea of kissing is actually considered revolting. They view it as a bizarre and unhygienic habit that serves no purpose. This suggests that the romantic kiss isn't a universal human hardware setting. It's a software package that only runs under certain conditions. And yet, nearly 90% of human cultures engage in some form of facial rubbing or lip-to-lip contact. This tells us that while the romance might be a modern layer, the underlying biological drive is doing something much more essential than just making us feel good. It's searching for a specific kind of danger. To understand why your brain would ever encourage you to swap spit with a stranger, you have to look at what's actually happening in the layers of skin on your lips. Human lips are an anatomical anomaly. Unlike most animals whose lips are often hidden or tucked away, our lips are everted. They are essentially turned inside out, exposing a dense concentration of sensory neurons that usually stay protected inside the body. Your lips are one of the most sensitive parts of your anatomy, packed with more nerve endings than almost anywhere else on your skin. When you kiss someone, these nerves send a massive electrical signal straight to your brain's somatosensory cortex, which, for those of you who don't spend your weekends reading neurology textbooks, is the part of the brain that maps your physical experiences. This signal is so intense that it forces your brain to pay more attention to your partner's mouth than to the rest of their body combined. But why go to all that trouble? Why would evolution design such an elaborate and sensitive sensor just for a greeting? The answer lies in the feeding hypothesis, popularized by researchers like Irenaeus Abel-Eibsfeld. Before the invention of baby food and industrial blenders, mothers in our deep past had to find ways to feed infants who couldn't yet chew. The solution was kiss feeding, the process of a mother chewing food and passing it directly from her mouth to the child's. This might sound unappealing today, unless you're a bird or a particularly traditional parent, but for 1,000,000 years, it was the gold standard of infant care. This act didn't just provide nutrients, it provided comfort, safety, and a transfer of essential digestive enzymes and bacteria. Over time, the brain began to associate this lip-to-lip contact with the most fundamental forms of survival and bonding. As those infants grew up, the neural pathways associated with that contact didn't just disappear. They remained, waiting to be repurposed by natural selection for a different kind of survival, the survival of the species through reproduction. We essentially took a mechanism for feeding children and turned it into a mechanism for choosing the person we'd have those children with. But that transition required a way to test whether that person was a safe bet, and that's where the chemistry gets truly lethal. When you kiss someone, you aren't just feeling their lips, you are smelling their genes. This brings us to one of the most famous and counterintuitive studies in the history of evolutionary psychology, the 1995 Sweaty T-shirt experiment conducted by Klaus Wedekind at the University of Bern. Wedekind asked a group of female students to smell the shirts worn by men for 2 nights and rank them based on which scent they found most attractive. The results were startling. The women consistently preferred the scent of men whose major histocompatibility complex, or MHC, genes were as different as possible from their own. The MHC is a set of genes that controls your immune system. It's essentially the wanted poster that tells your body which pathogens to look out for. Evolution wants us to partner with people who have different immune systems than we do, because a child born from 2 parents with diverse MHC genes will have a much broader, more robust immune defense. If you partner with someone whose immune system is too similar to yours, your children might be vulnerable to the same viruses that could wipe out both of you. Kissing is the short-range version of this test. While you can smell a person's general genetic health from across a room, if they've skipped a shower, you can't get a high-resolution data dump until you're close enough to taste them. The skin around the human mouth contains sebaceous glands that secrete oils containing pheromones and genetic markers. When you kiss, you are essentially swiping a credit card through a reader. Your brain is scanning the chemical profile of your partner to see if their immune system is a good match for yours. If the MHC genes are too similar, your brain might send a disgust signal that can end a relationship before it even starts. This isn't just a theory, it's backed up by the numbers. In a study conducted by evolutionary psychologist Gordon Gallup, 59% of men and 66% of women reported that they had found someone physically attractive and went on a first date, only to have their interest completely vanish after the very first kiss. They couldn't explain why. They just said there was no spark. In reality, their brains had just read a genetic report that said, "This person is a bad match," and immediately shut down the attraction. It's a ruthless system that prioritizes the health of a theoretical child over the feelings of the 2 people currently in the room. But even if the genetic match is perfect, kissing still presents a massive physical risk. When you exchange saliva, you are exposing yourself to whatever pathogens your partner is currently carrying. This should be a deal breaker for evolution, right? Why would we develop a habit that could spread the flu, herpes, or glandular fever, which is literally called the kissing disease for a reason? The answer is that the risk itself might be the point. Some researchers, like Dr. Colin Hendry from the University of Leeds, have proposed a fascinating and slightly terrifying theory, the immune priming hypothesis. Specifically, they focus on a virus called cytomegalovirus, or CMV. For most healthy adults, CMV is harmless, but if a woman catches it for the first time while she is pregnant, it can be devastating for the developing fetus. By kissing a partner repeatedly for months before a pregnancy occurs, the woman is slowly exposed to small amounts of the partner's specific strains of the virus. This allows her immune system to build up antibodies and defenses in a controlled way, essentially vaccinating her before the high-stakes period of pregnancy begins. The kiss isn't just a test, it's a biological training manual. This exchange is so vital that your body has developed a massive chemical reward system to make sure you keep doing it. Within seconds of a kiss beginning, your brain starts dumping a cocktail of neurotransmitters into your bloodstream. First comes the dopamine, the reward chemical. This is the same chemical that gets released when you win money, eat sugar, or use certain addictive drugs. It makes you feel a rush of euphoria and focus, effectively blinding you to your partner's flaws, a phenomenon that poets call love and biologists call adaptive myopia. At the same time, your levels of oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, begin to spike. Oxytocin is the chemical responsible for long-term bonding and trust. It's what keeps you around after the dopamine rush fades. And perhaps most importantly for your survival, kissing causes a significant drop in cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. By lowering cortisol, a kiss physically tells your nervous system that you are in a safe environment with a trusted ally. It shifts your body out of fight or flight mode and into rest and digest mode. You are literally using another person's mouth to regulate your own heart rate. However, all of this chemical bliss masks a deeper, darker truth about the deal-breaker nature of the kiss. While a good kiss can cement a bond, a bad one can be a biological death sentence for a relationship. This is because women, from an evolutionary standpoint, have much more to lose from a bad partner choice. A woman has a limited number of eggs and must commit years of biological energy to a single pregnancy and the subsequent rearing of a child. A man, theoretically, can walk away. Because the stakes are so much higher for women, their kissing sensors are much more finely tuned. Studies have shown that women place a much higher value on kissing than men do, and they are much more likely to use a kiss as a screening tool to evaluate a mate's long-term potential. Men, on the other hand, are more likely to view kissing as a means to an end, specifically, as a precursor to more intense physical activity. This creates a biological tension where the woman is trying to perform a complex genetic scan while the man is often just trying to get through the security gate. This tension is likely why the tongue became such a central part of the human kiss. The tongue is an incredible piece of muscular machinery, controlled by several different cranial nerves. It is capable of much more complex movements than the lips alone, and it can reach the deeper parts of the mouth where the most concentrated chemical signals are found. In the world of philematology, the scientific study of kissing, the French kiss isn't just a sign of passion, it's a high-bandwidth data transfer. By involving the tongue, you are increasing the volume of saliva exchanged and bringing your olfactory receptors closer to the source of your partner's pheromones. You are essentially turning up the volume on the genetic report. But this also increases the danger factor. More saliva means more bacteria, more viruses, and more potential for infection. The fact that we find this act pleasurable instead of terrifying is a testament to how badly our brains want that genetic data. We are willing to risk a week of the flu just to make sure our partner's MHC genes are compatible with ours. As we move through history, we see that humans have tried to codify this biological drive into social rules. In the Middle Ages, many people were illiterate, so legal documents were often signed with a simple X. To prove their sincerity and the binding nature of the oath, the person would then kiss the X. This is why we still use X to represent a kiss in letters today, a fact that would probably make most Victorian etiquette coaches faint on the spot. The kiss was seen as the ultimate physical proof of a person's word. Because you can't fake the biological response to a kiss. You can lie with your words, but you can't easily lie with your pheromones, your cortisol levels, or your pupil dilation. When you kiss someone, you are exposing your most vulnerable sensory organs to them. You are giving them access to your internal chemistry. It is the ultimate act of transparency. If the spark isn't there, no amount of social pressure or conscious effort can force it. The body knows what it wants, even if the person doesn't. Interestingly, this whole system might be under threat in the modern world. Some scientists have raised concerns that the use of hormonal birth control might be interfering with this ancient genetic screening process. Because birth control pills alter a woman's hormonal profile, essentially putting her body into a pseudo-pregnant state, they can change who she is attracted to. Some studies have suggested that women on the pill may no longer show a preference for partners with different MHC genes. In some cases, they actually begin to prefer men with similar MHC genes, the exact opposite of what evolution intended. This has led to the pill-driven breakup theory, where a woman chooses a partner while on the pill, but after she stops taking it to try for a child, her natural biological sensors wake up and realize that the man standing in front of her is a genetic mismatch. The spark that was never really there suddenly disappears, leaving the couple wondering what changed. It turns out that when we mess with our internal chemistry, we might be breaking the very tools we use to build our families for millions of years. But there is an even deeper layer to the kiss than just genetic testing. It's the sensory homunculus problem. If you were to draw a map of the human body where the size of each part was determined by how much space the brain devotes to processing its touch, you would end up with a monster. This homunculus would have massive hands and an absolutely enormous mouth and tongue. The reason for this is that our survival once depended entirely on what we put in our mouths. We had to be able to detect the smallest piece of sand in our food, the slightest hint of rot, or the texture of a poisonous plant. We evolved a mouth that is hypersensitive to the point of obsession. When we kiss, We are hijacking this survival-grade sensor and using it for social bonding. We are taking the equipment that was designed to tell us, "Don't eat this, it's poison," and using it to ask, "Is this person my future?" It's a brilliant bit of evolutionary recycling. And yet, for all the chemistry and neurology, we still haven't quite answered the most ominous question. Why didn't we just stop? Why, after we developed language and could just ask people about their health or their intentions, did we keep the spit swapping? The answer might be that language is too easy to hack. Humans are professional liars. We can pretend to be healthy, we can pretend to be loyal, and we can pretend to be a good match. But the biological cascade of a kiss is much harder to manipulate. When you lean in, your pupils dilate, your heart rate shifts, and your skin temperature changes in ways that are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. You are essentially putting yourself through a polygraph test administered by your partner's lips. If the data doesn't match the words, the relationship usually fails. In a sense, the kiss is the only part of a date that is truly honest. This brings us to the big reveal, the one that reframes everything we think we know about romance. While we think of a kiss as a way to get closer to someone, it's actually a way to see if we can tolerate them. Evolution is fundamentally conservative. It views everyone else as a potential carrier of death. To overcome that natural, healthy disgust for another person's bodily fluids, the reward for a kiss has to be massive. The reason a first kiss feels like a drug trip is because your brain is trying to overcome a million years of stay away from strangers programming. It is using every chemical tool in its arsenal to convince you that this specific person is worth the risk. If the kiss feels mediocre, it's not because the person is a bad kisser, in a technical sense. It's because your brain has decided that the risk of their pathogens and the mismatch of their genes isn't worth the reward. You aren't just looking for a good time. You are looking for an exception to the rule of biological isolation. This is why the perfect kiss is so rare. It requires a perfect alignment of genetic compatibility, timing, hormonal state, and bacterial tolerance. It's a miracle that it happens at all. Every time you feel that world-stopping sensation, you are experiencing the rare moment where your ancient survival instincts and your modern romantic desires are in total agreement. Your MHC genes are shouting yes, your dopamine pathways are firing on all cylinders, and your cortisol is bottoming out. For a few seconds, the danger of the other person vanishes, and they become, in a very literal biological sense, a part of you. You have successfully navigated the most complex screening process in the known universe. But don't get too comfortable, because as soon as that kiss ends, the data transfer is complete, and your brain starts preparing for the next step of the interrogation. When we look back at the journey of the human kiss, we see a path that starts with a mother feeding a child in a cave, moves through a high-stakes genetic screening in the African savanna, and ends in a modern-day movie theater. We've taken a messy, risky, bacterial exchange and dressed it up in velvet and candlelight, but underneath the surface, the caveman is still there, sniffing for clues. We are the descendants of the people who kissed the right strangers, the ones who successfully filtered out the genetic mismatches and the lethal pathogens to produce healthy, robust offspring. We are the products of a million years of successful data transfers. Every time you feel the urge to lean in, you are hearing the echo of that ancient success story. You are participating in a ritual that is older than the concept of love itself, a ritual that has kept our species alive through ice ages, plagues, and societal collapses. Which brings us back to the paradox we started with. Why would we ever do something so unhygienic? Because the danger of not kissing is much higher than the danger of catching a cold. Without the kiss, we are flying blind. We are choosing partners based on surface-level traits like wealth, status, or a symmetrical face, things that evolution knows can be faked. The kiss is the only way to get a look at the source code of the person standing in front of you. It is the ultimate reality check in a world of social performances. So, the next time you find yourself wondering why you're so nervous about a first kiss, just remember, your brain is about to run the most important diagnostic of your life. It's not just a romantic moment. It's a genetic audit with a 90% failure rate. If you've ever wondered why a single bad kiss could make you lose interest in someone who seemed perfect on paper, now you know that your immune system was just doing its job, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a mood killer for a Friday night. It's a strange feeling to realize that your most private, intimate moments are actually being managed by a cold-blooded biological committee that only cares about allele diversity and viral priming. But that's the beauty of the human story. We've taken the raw, brutal machinery of survival and woven it into the fabric of our most meaningful experiences. We've turned a genetic test into an art form. And even if you don't like the idea of being a walking data transfer port, you can't argue with the results. The system works, and it has been working since long before we had a word for romance. The reality of human evolution is that we are built from the ground up to seek out connection, but we are also built to be incredibly picky about who we connect with. The kiss is the bridge between those two drives. It is the moment where we move from watching to knowing. It's the highest form of trust our biology allows, an invitation for someone to enter our personal space and change our internal chemistry. Whether you find that thought poetic or deeply gross probably depends on your current dopamine levels. But regardless of how you feel about it, the process is happening every time you lean in. You are a biological detective, and every lip lock is a new lead in a case that has been open for 2 million years. The next time you find yourself locked in a passionate embrace, try not to think about the 80 million bacteria or the MHC gene screening taking place behind your teeth. It probably won't help the mood to remember that you're essentially performing a wet handshake for your immune system, but that is exactly what's happening. You aren't just being romantic, you're running a high-speed genetic diagnostic on a machine that has been refining its filters since the dawn of the species. And let's be realistic, you're going to do it anyway, because your brain is already addicted to the dopamine and your genes don't care about your opinion on the matter. You aren't the one in charge of who you love, your spit is.